Bodybuilders surgeries that went horribly wrong. They were once called indestructible, icons of power, proof that discipline could conquer biology. But behind the trophies and standing ovations lies a darker truth few fans were ever shown. In this video, we uncover how surgery meant to repair greatness sometimes became the moment everything fell apart. From broken bodies to lives permanently altered, these are the real costs of chasing perfection at any price. This is not gossip. This is documented history. If you value truth over myth and legacy over illusion, subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence and stay with us until the end. Ronnie Coleman. Ronnie Coleman's name will forever be etched into bodybuilding history as the standard by which power and mass were redefined. An 8-time consecutive Mr. Olympia winner from 1998 to 2005, Coleman was not merely dominant, he was transformational. His training philosophy rejected moderation. Squats and deadlifts exceeding 800 pounds, leg presses reportedly loaded with over 300 pounds, and marathon high-volume sessions became routine. At his peak, he embodied the belief that relentless effort could bend the human body beyond accepted limits. For years, that belief appeared justified as trophies accumulated and his physique reached proportions never seen before. Yet the foundation of that greatness was quietly fracturing. Coleman's physical issues did not begin at the end of his career. They started in his teens and intensified through college football at Grambling State University, where he played linebacker. By the late 1990s, severe spinal trauma was already present. In 1997, while squatting roughly 600 pounds, he suffered a herniated disc, an injury that doctors recommended be treated surgically. Coleman declined. On the brink of bodybuilding immortality, he chose chiropractic care instead, prioritizing competition over correction. If you were chasing a once-in-a-lifetime dream, would you have made the same decision? That choice defined the next decade. Coleman continued to train at extreme intensities, winning Olympia titles while unknowingly accelerating structural damage. By 2007, his body finally forced a reckoning. Chronic nerve pain, instability, and mobility loss led to what can only be described as a surgical cascade. Over time, Coleman underwent at least 15 major operations, including 8 back surgeries, 3 neck surgeries, and 2 hip replacements. These were not cosmetic or optional procedures. They were attempts to preserve basic function. Each surgery addressed a problem, but often created another. The most controversial period came between 2016 and 2018. A 13-hour spinal operation in 2016 marked a turning point, after which Coleman publicly stated that everything went downhill. In 2018, he endured 3 consecutive revision surgeries to repair and replace broken spinal hardware. According to Coleman, the screws initially used were not designed to withstand the load of a man with his size and muscle density. Several failed inside his body. The financial toll reportedly reached nearly $2 million, but the physical cost was far greater. His spine became almost entirely fused, stabilized by 14 screws, 2 rods, and multiple cages, leaving little natural movement. In 2025, Coleman faced one of the gravest threats of all: severe sepsis, a life-threatening systemic infection requiring emergency intervention. Sepsis carries a significant mortality risk even in otherwise healthy individuals. For someone with extensive surgical history, it was nearly fatal. Today, Coleman cannot walk independently and often relies on crutches or a wheelchair. This is a stark contrast to the man who once repped weights most people could not lift once. When strength fades, but purpose remains, how do you redefine success? What makes Ronnie Coleman's story uniquely powerful is not just the damage, but his mindset. Despite everything, pain, limited mobility, and irreversible changes, he has repeatedly stated he has no regrets. He continues to train 6 days a week, adapting his routines to what his body allows. To him, the surgeries are war wounds, the price paid for achieving something historic. For some viewers, that attitude inspires admiration. For others, it raises uncomfortable questions about the culture of extremity in professional bodybuilding. Ronnie Coleman's journey is not a cautionary tale built on rumor or exaggeration. It is documented through medical records, interviews, and visible reality. His case illustrates how greatness achieved through excess can demand payment long after applause fades. He remains a legend, but also a living reminder that the line between pushing limits and crossing them is often only recognized in hindsight. Kevin Levrone. Kevin Levrone stands as one of the most respected figures in modern bodybuilding, not because his career was untouched by disaster, but because of how narrowly it survived it. Nicknamed the Maryland Muscle Machine, Levrone competed in 13 Mr. Olympia contests, earning 4 second-place finishes and winning 23 IFBB Pro shows, a total surpassed only by Ronnie Coleman. His physique was admired for its balance, explosiveness, and rare ability to transform dramatically in short periods of time. Yet behind that reputation was a surgical crisis that should have ended everything. The defining moment came in February 1993, shortly after Levrone placed second at the 1992 Mr. Olympia. While bench pressing approximately 600 pounds, he suffered one of the most catastrophic injuries imaginable in bodybuilding, a complete rupture of both the pectoralis major and pectoralis minor muscles. This was not a partial tear. The muscles detached violently from the bone, leaving his chest visibly deformed and his arm function severely compromised. For most athletes, this level of trauma is career-ending, no debate. Levrone underwent an 8-hour reconstructive surgery, an unusually long duration that reflects the complexity of reattaching multiple torn muscle structures. Surgeons worked to restore anatomical placement, repair connective tissue, and preserve nerve function. The procedure itself was considered technically successful, but surgery was only the beginning of the danger. In the weeks that followed, Levrone developed a serious post-operative infection at the surgical site. Infection after major muscle reconstruction dramatically increases the risk of tissue death, strength loss, and permanent disfigurement. Doctors ordered a second surgery to remove infected material and prevent systemic spread. At this point, the bodybuilding world quietly assumed Kevin Levrone was finished. What followed defied medical expectation. Instead of accepting retirement, Levrone committed to an aggressive but disciplined rehabilitation process. He rebuilt mobility before strength, focusing on controlled movement rather than ego lifting. This distinction matters. Many athletes rush back to heavy loads, compounding surgical trauma. Levrone did the opposite. He allowed scar tissue to stabilize, inflammation to resolve, and neuromuscular control to return before chasing size. Even so, the risk remained enormous. A second rupture would have meant irreversible damage. Amazingly, just 8 weeks after his second surgery, Kevin Levrone stepped onto the stage at the 1994 Mr. Olympia and placed third. This is not motivational folklore. It is a verified competition result that still astonishes surgeons and trainers today. From a medical standpoint, this recovery bordered on unprecedented. Muscle reattachment typically requires months before maximal contraction is advised. Levrone's comeback did not mean the injury vanished. It meant he learned to manage and work around it with extreme precision. Over the remainder of his career, Levrone dealt with recurring inflammation and structural vulnerability in his chest. He adjusted training frequency, volume, and exercise selection to avoid re-injury. Unlike many athletes whose surgeries marked a steady decline, Levrone remained competitive for years, winning major shows and maintaining elite status. He eventually retired without the mobility loss or chronic dependence on assistive devices seen in other cases. In 2016, at age 51, Levrone shocked the bodybuilding world by returning to the Olympia stage decades after his original injury. While he was no longer chasing titles, the return symbolized something deeper: survival rather than dominance. His body bore scars, but it still responded. Kevin Levrone's story fits the title Bodybuilders Surgeries that went horribly wrong. Not because the surgery itself failed, but because everything surrounding it nearly did. A torn chest infection second operation and the constant threat of permanent loss formed a perfect storm. His case proves that recovery is possible, but also that such outcomes are the rare exception, not the rule. In the end, Levrone represents a different lesson than most. Surgery did not break him, but it demanded humility, patience, and restraint. For an audience that remembers bodybuilding's golden intensity, his story asks a sobering question. How many careers ended silently because they didn't have the margin of resilience Kevin Levrone did? Flex Wheeler. Flex Wheeler was never just another bodybuilder. To many longtime fans, especially those who followed the sport through the 1990s, he was the closest thing bodybuilding ever had to perfection. His structure symmetry and fluid muscle bellies earned him the nickname the Sultan of Symmetry. While others relied on sheer mass, Wheeler's appeal came from balance and aesthetics that seemed almost effortless. He won the Arnold Classic 4 times and consistently placed near the top at the Mr. Olympia, often labeled the uncrowned champion. Yet behind that visual excellence was a body under extraordinary internal strain, one that surgery would eventually expose rather than save. Wheeler's medical troubles began earlier than most realized. In 1999, he was involved in a severe car accident that fractured his neck and left doctors warning he might never train again. Remarkably, he returned to competition at an elite level, reinforcing the myth that his body was indestructible. But the real danger was not orthopedic alone. For years, Wheeler battled focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, a serious kidney disease that gradually destroys the organ's filtering ability. This condition is medically documented and unrelated to rumor. By the early 2000s, his kidney function had deteriorated to a critical level, forcing repeated hospitalizations and invasive procedures. In 2003, Flex Wheeler underwent a kidney transplant, one of the most life-altering surgeries an athlete can face. This was not a performance-enhancing intervention, it was a life-preserving necessity. Transplant surgery brings lifelong consequences: immunosuppressive medication, heightened infection, risk, reduced recovery capacity, and strict medical monitoring. For a professional bodybuilder whose career depends on intense training stress and rapid physical adaptation, these limitations were devastating. If survival demands you give up the body that defined you, what choice do you really have? Although Wheeler attempted a brief return to competition after the transplant, the reality was unavoidable. His physique never responded the same way. Muscle fullness diminished, recovery slowed dramatically, and the resilience that once separated him from his peers was gone. Unlike acute injuries that can be repaired and rehabilitated, organ failure changes the rules permanently. The surgeries did what they were meant to do, keep him alive, but they also closed the door on the version of Flex Wheeler fans remembered. The emotional toll was just as severe. Wheeler has spoken openly about the psychological struggle of watching his identity unravel. Years later, he faced another life-altering medical crisis. Complications from circulation problems in his lower body eventually led to the amputation of part of his right leg. While this event occurred after his competitive career, it underscored a harsh truth. His health battles were not confined to one chapter. Surgery after surgery became a means of containment, not restoration. What makes Flex Wheeler's story especially haunting is the contrast. His physique represented harmony and control, yet internally his body was fighting collapse. Unlike cases involving cosmetic shortcuts or reckless procedures, Wheeler's surgeries were medically necessary. There was no scandal, no malpractice, no illegal enhancement oils. And that is precisely why his case fits the theme, Bodybuilders Surgeries that went horribly wrong. Sometimes surgery goes wrong not because of error, but because the body has already been pushed beyond what even modern medicine can fully repair. For viewers aged 45 to 65 who remember Wheeler gliding across the stage with unmatched grace, his later years are difficult to reconcile. The fall feels unfair, yet his story carries a quieter, deeper lesson. Excellence can coexist with fragility. Discipline does not guarantee immunity. and even the most genetically gifted athlete can be undone by forces invisible to the eye. Flex Wheeler survived what might have killed others, but survival came at the cost of everything that once defined him. His legacy remains intact, not just as one of the greatest physiques in history, but as a sobering reminder that in bodybuilding, the most dangerous damage is often the kind no mirror ever shows. Shawn Rhoden. Shawn Rhoden's story is one of late-blooming triumph shadowed by a body that quietly carried years of damage. When he won the 2018 Mr. Olympia at age 43, he became the oldest first-time champion in the event's history, defeating a reigning dynasty with a physique built on density detail and classic lines. For many longtime fans, Rhoden's victory felt like a throwback proof that refinement and conditioning could still overcome sheer size. What the stage didn't show was the medical toll required to keep that body functioning at the highest level. Rhoden's physical challenges began long before his Olympia moment. Early in his adult life, he survived a serious car accident that caused extensive facial trauma and required reconstructive surgery to his jaw. While this incident wasn't related to bodybuilding, it marked the beginning of a life shaped by surgical recovery and physical resilience. As his professional career progressed, the strain shifted to joints and connective tissue, the silent liabilities of elite bodybuilding. Years of heavy pressing, high-volume leg work and contest preparation cycles placed relentless stress on his shoulders and knees, areas he later acknowledged had required medical intervention. Unlike dramatic single-event injuries, Rhoden's problems were cumulative. Shoulder instability, chronic inflammation, and reduced range of motion became recurring obstacles as he moved through his late 30s and early 40s. Surgical procedures were undertaken to stabilize damaged structures and extend his competitive window. These were not cosmetic operations or shortcuts. They were attempts to preserve function in a body that had been pushed to its limits. Recovery periods interrupted training momentum, forcing Rhoden to rebuild strength repeatedly while protecting vulnerable joints. The aftermath of his Olympia win revealed how narrow that margin had become. In the seasons following 2018, Rhoden struggled to regain the same sharpness and consistency. Lingering joint issues, limited exercise selection and intensity, especially in pressing movements that had once been strengths. Each surgical recovery brought stiffness and adaptation challenges that younger athletes often overcome more easily. At an age when most competitors are long retired, Rhoden was asking his body to heal at a pace biology rarely allows. What makes Rhoden's case particularly relevant to bodybuilders' surgeries that went horribly wrong is not a single botched operation, but the accumulated consequences of necessary procedures. Surgery kept him competitive, but it also narrowed his margin for error. Small setbacks took longer to resolve. Inflammation lingered. Structural balance became harder to maintain. The body that had carried him to the summit could no longer be reset between contests. For fans in the 45-65 age range, Rhoden's journey resonates differently. His peak came later, mirroring the reality that persistence can delay decline but not eliminate it. Surgery, even when performed correctly, cannot fully restore the elasticity, shock absorption, and recovery capacity of a younger body. In Rhoden's case, the operating room extended his career just long enough to achieve greatness, then quietly closed the door behind him. Rhoden passed away unexpectedly in 2021 at age 46, a loss that stunned the bodybuilding world. While his death was not directly attributed to surgery, it underscored a sobering truth. Elite bodybuilding places long-term strain on every system, visible and invisible. His medical history, accidents, joint surgeries, and chronic wear formed a backdrop to a career defined by discipline and perseverance. Shawn Rhoden will always be remembered for breaking a streak and redefining what was possible later in life. Yet his story also illustrates the fine line between preservation and depletion. Surgery helped him reach the pinnacle, but it could not protect him from the cumulative cost of decades under extreme physical demand. In that sense, Rhoden's legacy is both inspiring and cautionary, a reminder that even perfectly timed success may come with a bill the body eventually collects. Dexter Jackson. Dexter Jackson's career is often described with one word: longevity. Nicknamed the Blade for his razor-sharp conditioning, Jackson competed at the highest professional level for more than 2 decades, a rarity in a sport that routinely burns athletes out by their mid-30s. He won the 2008 Mr. Olympia, captured 5 Arnold Classic titles, and stepped on the Olympia stage a record 19 times. Yet behind that consistency was a body constantly negotiating with injury and eventually with surgery that permanently altered how he trained, competed, and aged in the sport. Unlike bodybuilders known for reckless extremes, Jackson built his success on precision. His training emphasized form, controlled volume, and repeatable routines. That discipline helped him avoid early catastrophic injuries, but it could not eliminate risk altogether. Years of heavy pressing, pulling, and arm-dominant movements placed enormous stress on the elbow and triceps, complex areas critical to his trademark upper body detail. By the mid-2010s, Jackson began dealing with persistent pain and weakness in his right arm, symptoms that quietly worsened despite continued competition. The breaking point came with a significant triceps tear, an injury that is particularly damaging for bodybuilders. The triceps are not only essential for pressing strength, but also for the visual thickness and separation judges expect on stage. Surgical repair was unavoidable. While the procedure itself was medically sound, the aftermath revealed a hard truth. Even successful surgery does not guarantee a return to pre-injury aesthetics. Scar tissue, altered muscle insertion, and reduced elasticity changed the way Jackson's arm responded to training. When symmetry is your calling card, how do you compete once balance is disrupted? Post-surgery, Jackson adapted rather than retreated. He modified exercise selection, reduced maximal loads, and focused on maintaining detail rather than chasing size. This approach allowed him to remain competitive well into his late 40s, culminating in a third-place finish at the 2019 Mr. Olympia at age 49, a feat almost unheard of. Yet careful observers noticed subtle differences. The once flawless flow of his arms showed slight irregularities, visible only because his standard had always been so high. In bodybuilding, where judging is comparative, even minor changes matter. What places Dexter Jackson firmly within the theme "Bodybuilders Surgeries that went horribly wrong" is not dramatic failure, but irreversible compromise. Surgery preserved his career, but it also set a ceiling he could not break through again. The triceps injury limited how aggressively he could train upper body pushing movements. Recovery times lengthened. Warm-ups grew longer. Every session required calculation rather than instinct. These are the quiet consequences viewers rarely see. For fans aged 45 to 65, Jackson's story hits close to home. His experience mirrors aging itself, learning to work around limitations instead of pretending they don't exist. Surgery did not betray him, but it demanded humility. He could no longer train the way he did at 30, yet he refused to surrender excellence altogether. That balance is why his career lasted as long as it did. Jackson officially retired from competition in 2020, closing his Olympia journey not because he could no longer place respectably, but because the physical cost had finally outweighed the reward. His post-competitive life has focused on health business ventures and selective training rather than relentless preparation. The blade remained sharp, but it was no longer being pushed against the grindstone. Dexter Jackson's legacy challenges a common misconception. Not every horribly wrong surgery ends in wheelchairs or headlines. Some end in subtle loss of peak performance, of symmetry, of the effortless execution that once defined greatness. His story reminds us that in bodybuilding, survival is not the same as preservation. Surgery can extend a career, but it always leaves a signature behind. In the end, Jackson stands as proof that discipline can slow decline, but cannot erase biology. His greatness endured, yet it did so on altered terms. And for a sport obsessed with perfection, that may be the most sobering lesson of all. Darren Charles. Darren Charles is often remembered as one of bodybuilding's most consistent and quietly accomplished professionals, a man who built a respected career without scandal, shortcuts, or controversy. Born in Trinidad and Tobago and later representing the United States, Charles carved out his place in the sport through relentless work ethic and technical precision. He earned 8 IFBB Pro victories, including multiple wins at the San Francisco Pro and Toronto Pro, and competed at the Mr. Olympia level for years. His physique was known for clean lines, tight conditioning, and balanced proportions rather than sheer mass. Yet behind that steady success was a physical setback that surgery could not truly undo. Charles's major turning point came with a severe triceps injury, one of the most unforgiving injuries a professional bodybuilder can suffer. The triceps play a critical role not only in pressing strength, but also in the visual thickness of the upper arm, an area judges scrutinize relentlessly. The tear was not superficial. It disrupted muscle integrity to the point where surgical intervention was unavoidable. For an athlete whose career depended on symmetry and detail, this was a direct threat to his professional identity. The surgery itself was medically necessary and competently performed, but the outcome revealed a hard truth about bodybuilding injuries: repair does not equal restoration. Post-operation. Charles faced the long, uncertain process of rehabilitation. Scar tissue formed where elastic muscle once moved freely. Neural connection and muscle responsiveness were altered, while basic function returned, peak performance did not. The arm no longer responded evenly to training stimulus and visual balance once a strength became increasingly difficult to maintain. Unlike some athletes who chase aggressive comebacks, Charles approached recovery with caution. He adjusted his training style, reduced loading, and focused on control rather than maximal weight. This allowed him to remain competitive for a time, but the margin was thin. In bodybuilding, small asymmetries become magnified under stage lights. Judges do not score effort or intent, only what is presented on the day. Despite discipline and experience, Charles found that the surgical repair placed a ceiling on what his physique could once again become. What places Darren Charles squarely within the theme "Bodybuilders Surgeries that went horribly wrong" is not negligence or malpractice, but irreversibility. The surgery did its job, it saved the arm. What it could not do was return him to his pre-injury equilibrium. Over time, compensations emerged. Training became more strategic, less instinctive. Recovery required more planning. The spontaneous explosiveness that once defined his stage presence gradually faded. For viewers aged 45 to 65, Charles's story resonates in a familiar way. It mirrors the experience of aging professionals who suffer one major injury, too many, not enough to end their careers outright, but enough to permanently change how they perform. Surgery becomes a tool for preservation, not progression. In that sense, Charles's journey is deeply human. He did everything right, followed medical advice, avoided reckless behavior, and still paid a lasting price. Eventually, Darren Charles stepped away from top-tier competition, not because he lacked discipline or desire, but because the physical equation no longer added up. His post-competitive life has reflected the same grounded mindset that defined his career, focusing on health mentoring and sustainable fitness rather than extremes. There is dignity in that transition, even if it came sooner than he might have hoped. Darren Charles may not dominate headlines the way some legends do, but his story carries a powerful message. In bodybuilding, surgery doesn't have to be botched to go horribly wrong. Sometimes it simply marks the moment when the body quietly informs you that the peak has passed. His legacy is one of professionalism, restraint, and realism, proof that even the most disciplined athletes cannot negotiate forever with biology. Kai Greene. Kai Greene's career has always existed at the intersection of artistry and extremity, known as the Predator. Greene was never simply chasing trophies, he was crafting a physique that told a story. His rise from homelessness in Brooklyn to multiple Mr. Olympia runner-up finishes and major pro victories made him one of the most compelling figures of his era. Dense muscle, dramatic separation, and expressive posing defined his presence. But beneath the creativity and charisma was a body repeatedly pushed into surgical territory where medicine became a tool of survival rather than improvement. Green's most significant physical setbacks centered on hip, abdominal, and lower body trauma areas that absorb relentless stress from heavy squats, lunges, and leg presses performed year after year. Unlike isolated tears, these issues developed gradually, often masked by pain tolerance and adaptation. As his career advanced, Green underwent surgical repair for a serious abdominal injury, a procedure that quietly reshaped how he trained and competed. Abdominal surgery in bodybuilding is especially consequential. The midsection is not only structural, but aesthetic, directly affecting vacuum control posture and stage presentation. Recovery from such procedures is notoriously unforgiving. Scar tissue can alter muscle contraction, reduce elasticity, and disrupt the fine motor control required for elite posing. Green returned to competition, but careful observers noticed subtle changes, guarded movement patterns, strategic exercise choices, and longer recovery windows. He compensated with intelligence rather than force-shifting emphasis toward quality and control. When your core, the center of power and balance, can no longer be pushed without consequence, how do you redefine intensity? In later seasons, Green also dealt with hip-related complications which further constrained his lower body training. Hips are load-bearing junctions. Once compromised, they influence everything from gait to squat depth. Surgical intervention aimed to restore function, not enhance performance. That distinction matters. Each procedure stabilized a problem but narrowed the margin for error. Training became a negotiation, what could be done safely versus what once built dominance. What makes Kai Green's surgical story resonate with bodybuilders' surgeries that went horribly wrong is its quiet severity. There were no public scandals or sensational failures. Instead, there was a gradual erosion of capacity. Surgery did not end his career overnight. It changed its trajectory. After placing second at the Mr. Olympia multiple times, Green stepped away from the contest stage while still competitive, a decision that puzzled fans expecting one final title run. Behind the scenes, the calculus was clear: continued pursuit risked permanent damage. Green's choice to pivot toward film art mentoring and selective appearances reflected self-awareness rare in a culture that often rewards denial. He maintained an elite physique without subjecting himself to the relentless cycles that had already demanded surgical correction. For an audience in the 45 to 65 range, this decision carries weight. It echoes the moment many face when experience finally outweighs ambition and preservation becomes victory. Importantly, Green has never framed surgery as betrayal. He has spoken about listening to the body, respecting its signals, and understanding that longevity requires restraint. In that sense, his story differs from more catastrophic cases. The operations were not botched, but the necessity of them revealed the cost of years spent at physiological extremes. Once surgery enters the equation, the illusion of infinite progress fades. Kai Green's legacy endures not just in muscle memory, but in the example he set by stepping back before the damage became irreversible. His journey reminds us that in bodybuilding, surgery doesn't have to fail spectacularly to go horribly wrong. Sometimes it simply marks the point where the body draws a final boundary. Crossing it may bring a moment of glory, but respecting it can preserve a lifetime of movement. In the end, Green's story asks a sobering question without ever stating it outright. Is the ultimate victory found on stage or in knowing when to walk away intact? These stories force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The same surgeries meant to save elite bodybuilders often became the moment everything changed. Careers slowed, bodies broke, and legacies were rewritten. For Black bodybuilding legends, greatness was earned through discipline and sacrifice, but the physical cost did not end when the lights went out. Surgery preserved life, not dominance, and sometimes took more than it gave back. So the real question isn't who lifted the most or won the biggest title. This was the price of pushing beyond human limits worth paying. In the end, legends of black excellence.